Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
All right, so are you ready to dive into another research paper with me?
Always ready to dive in.
Let me tell you, this one is a doozy.
Oh, boy.
This is hot off the press from Cell, and it's a little eerie
Okay.
because remember the early days of COVID?
Yeah.
All the uncertainty and the,
Absolutely.
lockdowns and everything.
Right.
Well, researchers in Wuhan have found a new bat virus, and get this.
Oh.
It can infect human cells in the lab.
Okay.
And you know what receptor it uses?
Let me guess ACE2.
ACE2.
Wow.
The same one as SARS-CoV-2.
So.
Yeah. So we're going to break down this paper, figure out what we know about this new virus they're calling HKU5 CoV-2, and explore whether we
Wow.
need to be stocking up on toilet paper again.
Well, it's certainly a discovery that warrants a closer look. I think,
Yeah.
first of all, finding a new virus in bats isn't exactly a shocker. I mean,
Right.
they're like the Fort Knox of viruses.
Yeah.
Especially coronaviruses. And with humans increasingly encroaching on bat habitats, the chances of one of these viruses making the jump to humans, well,
Right.
it's not a matter of if but when.
Right, like that whole don't eat the bats message
Check
that
it
we
out.
all learned the hard way a few years back.
Yeah.
So this virus, HKU5 CoV-2, it's a Merbecovirus, which is a type of beta coronavirus. So that puts it in the same family as MERS.
Right.
Not exactly the family reunion you want to get an invite to.
No, not really. And what makes this particular virus stand out is that most merbecoviruses
Okay.
use a different receptor to enter cells.
Okay.
This one, however, uses ACE2, just like SARS-CoV-2.
So same receptor, same potential entry point.
That's a big deal because it means it has the potential to infect the same types of cells in our bodies.
That's not exactly comforting.
I know.
And you mentioned that this was found in Pipistrellus bats, right?
Yep, Pipistrellus.
Aren't those the teeny tiny ones that could basically like roost in your coffee cup?
Yeah, they're tiny, and they're not just hanging out in Wuhan.
Oh.
They're found pretty much everywhere around the world, which is a bit unnerving when you think about the potential for this virus to spread.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
This HKU5 CoV-2 is actually part of a larger family, so to speak.
Okay.
It's a distinct lineage,
Okay.
lineage 2 to be precise,
Yeah.
of a known virus called HKU5-CoV.
So like a cousin of a virus we already know about.
Precisely.
But this cousin has gone a little rogue.
It has. And while the researchers haven't found any evidence of human transmission yet,
Okay.
the fact that this virus can infect human cells in a lab setting
Yeah.
definitely raises some red flags.
Right, because infecting cells in a petri dish is one thing.
Right.
But actually causing disease in a person, that's a whole other story.
Exactly.
So how did they actually figure out that this virus could infect human cells? Did they like round up a bunch of volunteers and
No, nothing like that.
Okay.
They use a technique called cryo-electron microscopy,
Okay.
which is like taking a super high-resolution snapshot
Okay.
of the virus interacting with the ACE2 receptor.
So they could actually see how it binds, like watching a microscopic lock and key.
It is.
That's incredible.
And what they saw was that while HKU5-CoV-2 can use the ACE2 receptor,
Okay.
it doesn't bind as strongly as SARS-CoV-2.
Okay.
That's a good thing
Yeah.
because it suggests it might not be as efficient at getting into our cells.
Okay, so a slightly less sticky key.
Yes.
But I remember reading that this virus has what they call a broad host range.
Right.
Does that mean it can infect, like, cells from other animals, too?
That's exactly what it means.
Like, could my dog get it?
Potentially.
Okay.
The researchers found that this virus can infect cells from a variety of mammals, not just bats and humans.
Okay.
And that's where things get a little more complicated because
Yeah.
the wider the range of animals a virus can infect,
Yeah.
the more opportunities it has to mutate and potentially become more transmissible to humans.
So it's like playing viral roulette,
Right.
and we don't know where the ball is going to land.
That's a pretty good analogy. And to test just how well this virus could replicate in human cells, the researchers did something pretty remarkable.
Okay.
They used what are called human organoids,
Okay.
which are basically like miniature versions of our organs grown in a lab.
Wait, mini organs? Like tiny lungs and stuff?
It's actually cutting-edge science.
Yeah. That sounds straight out of a science fiction movie.
And it allows researchers to study how viruses behave in a more realistic environment than just a petri dish.
Okay.
And in this case, they infected both lung and gut organoids with HKU5 CoV-2.
What happened that those mini organs turn into, like, viral breeding grounds?
Let's just say the virus seemed to really like those organoids.
Oh, no.
It replicated very efficiently,
Okay.
increasing viral titers significantly,
Okay.
which basically means it was multiplying like crazy within those mini versions of our lungs and guts.
Okay, so it can infect human cells, it can replicate efficiently in tissues that mimic our organs, and it has a broad host range. I'm sensing a theme here. And it's not exactly calming my early pandemic anxieties.
It's definitely a cause for concern
Yeah.
and something we need to monitor closely. But remember,
Right.
this research is still very preliminary.
Right. Infecting cells in a lab is one thing, but actually causing an illness in a person is a whole other story.
Right.
So what else did they find out about this virus? Did they uncover any clues about how it might actually spread between people?
That's the big question. And unfortunately, we don't have a clear answer yet. They haven't done any animal studies to see how the virus transmits in a living organism.
Okay.
And that's a crucial piece of the puzzle.
So it's like we've got all the ingredients for a potential pandemic, but we don't know if the recipe actually works yet.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
We know this virus can infect human cells,
Right?
but we don't know if it can jump from person to person or how easily it might spread.
All right, so no need to barricade ourselves in our homes just yet,
Not yet.
but definitely something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely.
So where do we go from here? What are the next steps in understanding this new viral threat?
Well, there are a few key areas that researchers will likely focus on.
Okay.
First, they need to figure out how this virus might be transmitted.
Okay.
That means conducting animal studies
Okay.
to see how it spreads in a more realistic setting.
So like putting some infected bats and some healthy bats in a room together and seeing what happens.
Something like that, although they'll likely use animal models that are more closely related to humans,
Okay.
like monkeys or ferrets.
Okay. Makes sense. So transmission is a big one. What else?
Another key area is understanding the virus's ability to mutate.
Right.
Remember we talked about how it has a broad host range?
Right, like that whole viral roulette thing we were talking about.
Exactly. And as it replicates in different hosts, it can accumulate mutations.
Haha.
And some of those mutations could potentially make it more transmissible to humans.
So we need to figure out how fast it mutates, what kinds of mutations it's prone to, and whether any of those mutations could make it a bigger threat to us.
Precisely. And that brings us to another important area of research.
Okay.
Developing potential treatments.
Ah, yes. The silver lining playbook. Did they find anything promising in that department?
They actually did test a few existing antiviral drugs against HKU5 CoV-2.
Okay.
And some of them showed pretty good results.
So we might already have some weapons in our arsenal to fight this thing should it ever become a problem.
Potentially, they also tested a drug called a fusion inhibitor,
Okay.
which basically blocks the virus from entering our cells. And that showed promise as well.
Okay.
But there's a twist when it comes to antibodies.
Oh, I don't like the sound of twist.
Well, they found that antibodies that work against SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19,
Yeah.
were not effective against HKU5 CoV-2.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
So all those antibody treatments we developed for COVID wouldn't work against this new virus?
It's likely due to the differences in the spike proteins of the two viruses.
Okay.
Remember we talked about how HKU5 CoV-2 can tolerate mutations in the region that binds to the ACE2 receptor?
Mm-hmm.
Well, those mutations could be enough to throw off the antibodies that were designed to target the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein.
So it's like the virus has put on a disguise, making it invisible to our existing defenses.
That's a good way to think about it.
Okay.
And it highlights the challenges of developing broadly effective antiviral treatments.
Yeah.
Viruses are constantly evolving,
Okay.
so our treatments need to keep pace.
Well, this deep dive has definitely been enlightening, but I have to admit, it's also a bit unsettling.
Yeah,
It's like a real-life science thriller unfolding right before our eyes.
it definitely has all the elements of a compelling story.
Yeah.
A mysterious new virus, potential for global spread,
Uh-huh.
and the race to find a cure. But unlike a movie, this is real life,
Right.
and the stakes are incredibly high.
Absolutely. And as we've seen with COVID-19, pandemics can have devastating consequences. Absolutely.
So what can we do as individuals and as a global community to prepare for the next potential pandemic?
That's a critical question and one that we'll explore in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll delve into the lessons learned from COVID-19, the importance of public health infrastructure, and the role of individual responsibility in preventing future outbreaks.
Sounds like a plan. I'm ready to dive even deeper into this fascinating and, let's be honest, slightly terrifying world of emerging viruses. Stay tuned, folks, because the plot thickens.
It does.
So welcome back. We've been talking about this new bat virus, HKU5 CoV-2, that researchers in Wuhan have identified. And, it can use the same receptor as SARS-CoV-2, which is concerning.
Right.
And it can replicate, effectively in those lab-grown mini organs.
The organoids.
Yeah, the organoids. But it's still early days in terms of understanding just how much of a threat this virus poses to humans.
Right.
So let's unpack some more of the findings from this paper, shall we?
One thing that really stood out to me was the role of certain enzymes called proteases in helping this virus get into our cells.
Yes. Proteases are like molecular scissors that can cleave proteins. And in the case of some viruses, they can actually help the virus fuse with the host cell membrane and gain entry.
So they're like little accomplices for the virus.
Exactly.
Helping it break into our cells.
Exactly. And what the researchers found was that two specific proteases, TMPRSS2 and cathepsin L, were able to facilitate the entry of HKU5 CoV-2 into human cells. Now, if those names sound familiar, it's because they were also involved in the entry of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19.
Okay, so this new virus is using some of the same tools as its more infamous cousin.
Right.
That's not great, is it?
Well, it does suggest that HKU5-CoV-2 might be able to exploit some of the same pathways to infect our cells as SARS-CoV-2 did.
Right.
However, it's important to remember that there are also key differences between the two viruses.
We talked about how this new virus doesn't bind as strongly to the ACE2 receptor as SARS-CoV-2.
Right.
And its spike protein, the part that actually latches onto the receptor, isn't quite as efficient at getting the virus into cells. So it's like it's trying to use the same playbook, but isn't quite as skilled at it.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And those differences might actually work in our favor. The weaker binding and less efficient entry suggests that HKU5-CoV-2 might not be as easily transmissible between humans as SARS-CoV-2 was.
Okay, that's a little bit of a relief. But you mentioned earlier that this virus is pretty tolerant to mutations in the area of the spike protein that binds to ACE2.
Right.
Couldn't those mutations change the game, so to speak?
They could.
Could this virus evolve to become more efficient at infecting human cells?
That's certainly a possibility, and it's one of the big unknowns with this new virus.
Right.
Viruses are constantly mutating, and those mutations can sometimes give them an advantage, like increased transmissibility or the ability to evade our immune system.
So we can't just assume that this virus will stay relatively harmless. We need to keep a close eye on how it evolves and whether it picks up any mutations that make it more of a threat to humans.
Exactly. Ongoing surveillance and research are going to be absolutely crucial in understanding the trajectory of this virus.
Okay, speaking of research, I want to circle back to those organoids you mentioned earlier. Those lab-grown mini organs.
Right.
They sound like something out of science fiction.
They do.
Can you explain a bit more about how they're actually made?
Sure.
And why they're such a valuable tool for studying viruses?
Organoids are essentially three-dimensional clusters of cells that are derived from stem cells. And because they're derived from stem cells, they can be coaxed into developing into different types of tissues, like lung tissue or gut tissue.
So it's like scientists can create mini versions of our organs in a dish.
That's amazing.
It is a pretty remarkable technology. And what makes organoids so valuable for studying viruses is that they provide a more realistic model of how viruses might interact with human tissues compared to just growing cells in a flat layer in a petri dish.
Exactly.
So it's like giving the virus a more lifelike environment to play in, so to speak.
Exactly. And by observing how the virus replicates and spreads within these organoids, scientists can get a better understanding of its potential to cause disease.
And in this case, they saw that HKU5-CoV-2 replicated quite efficiently in both lung and gut organoids, which isn't exactly reassuring news.
True, but it's important to note that these are still in vitro studies, meaning they're conducted outside of a living organism.
Right.
What happens in an organoid might not necessarily reflect what would happen in a person.
Right. There's a big difference between infecting cells in a dish and actually causing an illness in a human being. But still, these organoid studies give us some valuable clues about the potential of this virus.
They do, and they highlight the importance of continuing to develop and refine these models to better understand viral behavior.
Okay, so we've talked about how this virus gets into cells, how it replicates in those mini organs,
Right.
and the potential for it to mutate.
Yeah.
What about treatments? You mentioned that some existing antiviral drugs showed promise against HKU5 CoV-2.
They did?
Can you tell us a bit more about those?
Sure. The researchers tested a couple of antiviral drugs that are already approved for use against other viruses.
Okay.
One was Merbecovirus,
Okay.
which is used to treat COVID-19,
Okay.
and the other was Remdesivir,
Okay.
which is also used for COVID-19 and some other viral infections.
Okay.
Both of these drugs were able to inhibit the replication of HKU5 CoV-2 in cell cultures.
So we might actually have some off-the-shelf medications that could work against this new virus. That's good to know.
It is, but it's important to emphasize that these drugs haven't been tested in humans infected with HKU5 CoV-2. Right.
So we don't know for sure how effective they would be in a real-world setting.
Right. It's still early days,
Mm.
but it's encouraging to know that there might be some potential treatment options out there.
Absolutely. And in addition to those antiviral drugs,
Okay.
the researchers also tested a type of drug called a fusion inhibitor.
Okay.
This drug, called HKU5
Okay.
works by blocking the virus from fusing with the host cell membrane, essentially preventing it from entering the cell in the first place.
So it's like putting up a wall around our cells,
Exactly.
keeping the virus out.
Exactly. And they found that HK1C4 was quite effective at inhibiting the entry of HKU5 CoV-2 into human cells.
Okay, so we've got some antivirals that might work and a fusion inhibitor that shows promise.
Yeah.
What about antibodies? Didn't you say that antibodies that target SARS-CoV-2
Right.
weren't effective against this new virus?
That's right. They tested a panel of monoclonal antibodies that were developed to treat COVID-19,
Yeah.
but none of them were able to neutralize HKU5 CoV-2. That's a bit of a bummer. Why wouldn't those antibodies work? I thought antibodies were supposed to be like the superheroes of our immune system.
They are important players in our immune defense.
Yeah.
But they're not always foolproof.
Okay.
Antibodies work by binding to specific proteins on the surface of viruses.
Uh-huh.
And those proteins can vary between different viruses.
So the antibodies that were designed to target the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2
Right.
just couldn't recognize the spike protein of HKU5 CoV-2. It's like they were looking for a specific face in a crowd, but that face had changed.
It's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Remember we talked about how HKU5 has those mutations in the region of the spike protein that binds to the ACE2 receptor?
Yeah.
Well, those mutations might be enough to alter the shape of the spike protein,
Uh-huh.
making it unrecognizable to the SARS-CoV-2 antibodies.
So this virus has essentially developed a disguise to evade our existing defenses. That's both fascinating and a little bit scary.
Yeah, it is, and it highlights the importance of developing broadly neutralizing antibodies.
Yeah.
Antibodies that can recognize and target a wider range of viral strains.
Okay, so we've got some potential treatments in the pipeline.
Right,
But we also need to keep working on new approaches,
right.
like these broadly neutralizing antibodies. It sounds like a constant battle between us and these evolving viruses.
It is a constant battle, but one that we can win if we stay vigilant
Yeah.
and invest in research and innovation.
Well, this research on HKU5 CoV-2 is a great example of how science can help us stay one step ahead of these emerging threats.
Absolutely. By studying these viruses, understanding their weaknesses, and developing countermeasures,
Yeah.
we can better protect ourselves from future pandemics.
This deep dive has been incredibly informative, but I have to admit it's also a bit of a wake-up call.
It is.
You know, it's a reminder that the world of viruses is complex and constantly changing,
Right.
and we need to be prepared for whatever comes next.
That's a key takeaway from all of this. We can't afford to be complacent. We need to be proactive, not reactive, when it comes to pandemic preparedness.
So what does that look like in practice? What are the key things we need to focus on to ensure we're better prepared for the next pandemic?
That's a great question, and one that we'll delve into in more detail in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll explore the lessons learned from COVID-19, the importance of investing in public health infrastructure, and the role that individuals can play in preventing future outbreaks.
Okay.
So stay tuned because we're about to get even deeper into this critical topic.
Okay, so we're back, and we've spent a good chunk of time talking about this new bat virus, HKU5 CoV-2.
They have.
And, you know, it can use the same receptor as SARS-CoV-2, replicates well in human cells, and it's got this ability to mutate, which always, you know, kind of throws a wrench in the works.
It does.
But now I'm curious, like, what does this all mean for us in the bigger picture? I mean, it feels like every few years there's a new virus making headlines. So how can we actually prepare for the next pandemic?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think the COVID-19 pandemic really drove home the point that we can't afford to be caught flat-footed again.
Yeah.
We need to be proactive, not reactive.
Right.
And one of the most critical lessons we learned from COVID-19 is the importance of robust public health infrastructure.
Okay, so public health infrastructure, what does that actually mean in this context?
Right.
Is it about having enough hospitals and ventilators, or is there more to it?
It's certainly about having adequate healthcare capacity.
Okay.
But it goes far beyond that. It's about investing in disease surveillance systems.
Okay.
So we can detect outbreaks early on before they have a chance to spread widely.
Okay.
It's about having strong laboratory networks that can rapidly identify and characterize new pathogens. It's about having clear communication channels to inform the public and coordinate responses effectively.
Okay.
And perhaps most importantly, it's about building trust between the public and public health authorities.
That makes sense, because even if we have all the resources in the world, if people don't trust the information they're being given or they're not willing to cooperate with public health measures, then it's all for naught, right?
Precisely. We saw during COVID-19 how misinformation and distrust can undermine even the best laid plans.
Yeah.
So building that trust is absolutely foundational to pandemic preparedness.
So public health infrastructure is key. What else can we learn from our experience with COVID-19? What other strategies can we implement to get ahead of the next pandemic?
Well, one area that really needs more attention is research and development.
Okay.
We need to be investing in the development of new antiviral drugs, vaccines, and diagnostic tools. And we need to do this before the next pandemic hits.
Yeah.
Not scramble to catch up once it's already spreading.
Right, because trying to develop treatments and vaccines in the middle of a crisis, that's like trying to build a length raft while you're already drowning.
Exactly. We need to have those tools ready to go so we can deploy them quickly and effectively when we need them. And that means supporting basic research clinical trials and the manufacturing capacity to produce these life-saving interventions at scale.
So investing in research and development, building up our public health infrastructure, and fostering trust between the public and health authorities. It sounds like a pretty tall order, but I guess the question is, are we actually making progress in these areas? Are we better prepared today than we were 5 years ago when COVID-19 hit?
It's a mixed bag, to be honest.
Yeah.
There has been some progress, certainly in terms of awareness and a renewed focus on pandemic preparedness. But there are also significant challenges, particularly when it comes to funding and political will.
Because let's face it, pandemic preparedness isn't exactly the sexiest topic, is it? It's not something that grabs headlines or wins elections. So how do we convince policymakers and the public that this is an issue worth investing in?
It's a tough sell, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think the key is to frame pandemic preparedness as an investment in our collective future, in our security and our economic well-being.
Okay.
Pandemics can cripple healthcare systems, disrupt global trade, and cost trillions of dollars.
Right.
Preventing pandemics, or at least mitigating their impact, is far more cost-effective than dealing with the fallout after the fact.
Right. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as they say.
Exactly.
But it can't all fall on governments and institutions, right? What role can individuals play in pandemic preparedness?
Individuals have a huge role to play.
Okay.
And it starts with staying informed about potential threats, practicing good hygiene, and getting vaccinated against preventable diseases.
So the basics still matter, huh?
Yeah.
Washing our hands, covering our coughs, getting our flu shots. It might sound simple,
Right.
but those little things can make a big difference.
Absolutely. And it's also about being aware of our own health.
Yeah.
And taking appropriate precautions when we're sick, like staying home, to avoid spreading germs to others.
Okay, so being informed, practicing good hygiene, staying home when we're sick. Got it. But it goes beyond just taking care of ourselves, right? It's also about looking out for our communities.
Exactly. It's about supporting policies that promote public health, advocating for investment in research and infrastructure, and speaking out against misinformation. We all have a role to play in creating a culture of preparedness.
So it's a collective effort. Governments, institutions, individuals, we all need to work together.
We do.
To build a more resilient world.
Right.
A world that's better prepared to face the inevitable challenges of emerging infectious diseases.
Well said. And while it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the complexities of pandemic preparedness, I think it's important to remember that we do have the power to make a difference.
Yeah.
By taking action, by being informed, and by advocating for change,
Right.
we can create a safer and healthier future for all of us.
This deep dive has certainly given us a lot to think about. It's been fascinating, a little bit frightening, and ultimately, I think, empowering. We've learned about a new virus.
Right.
We've explored the complexities of pandemic preparedness.
Well, yeah.
And we've discussed the actions we can take to protect ourselves and our communities.
Absolutely.
So for our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into this new research paper.
Yeah.
We hope it sparked your curiosity, informed your understanding, and inspired you to be a part of the solution. Stay curious, stay engaged, and stay well.
Until next time, keep exploring the fascinating world of science. And remember, knowledge is our greatest defense.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To-Do Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.